Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me at today's event. I'm Commissioner Starks, and I want to, at the very start here, let everybody know that today's event is being recorded. We're, of course, here gathered on the future of work, in particular on Black-owned businesses and the digital divide. And so thank you all for joining us virtually. As you can tell, we have an incredible group of participants here today. I'm honored that you all are here and able to join me. And so just a couple of remarks here at the start. You know, it was around this time last year that I was on a southern tour across Georgia and Alabama. I visited Montgomery, Alabama, and later Selma, where the late Congressman John Lewis, of course, risked his life in the fight for civil rights. And during my travel, I had the opportunity to sit down with the Selma mayor, Dario Melton. And we discussed, of course, what his historic treasure of a city needs as it continues to develop and rebound. And one of those needs was very clearly connectivity. And I was introduced to the leaders, in particular, of the Selma Public Housing Authority, who have prioritized getting their residents in low-income housing access to free broadband and tablets. And in particular, I met, and I'll never forget it, with a single mother of 3 children who lived in the George Washington Carver homes and benefited from this program. And she told me with great pride how at-home broadband access enabled her to complete her assignments for her online degree program while her children finished their own homework. And so it was a living and powerful example of broadband's ability to transform lives and transform communities. 1 month later, we didn't know it then, but we were in the midst of obviously a global pandemic. And the country collectively took notice of what the people of Selma already knew. And that is that the digital divide and the economic opportunity divide run parallel to one another. These divides impact businesses, households, entire communities. But more specifically, we have learned and seen that small businesses, in particular owned by Black people, have been hit hardest by the pandemic. One study shows that Black business ownership in the U.S. has plummeted 41% as the novel coronavirus shut down the economy, restructured the way that we go about our daily lives. And so research also shows that many Black-owned businesses lack the resources needed to digitize their companies, respond to the moment so that consumers can access their services and produce products via online platforms. And so we must remember that rebuilding our economy means ensuring that Black businesses get connected, communities get connected. And so in order to boost our economy, we must also connect those Black workers to affordable broadband. Although broadband access has taken up a lot of oxygen in recent policy debates, this pandemic has made it clear that we must couple that discussion with broadband adoption, especially because nearly 3 times as many people who live in urban areas remain unconnected as those in rural areas. And so additionally, Pew Research shows that nearly 34% of Black people in America do not have that home broadband connection that they need, a disproportionately higher percentage than our counterparts. And this matters because people can't work remotely, start or sustain their own businesses, upskill and reskill themselves as they turn to online training programs, if that barrier is adopting broadband affordability. Rebuilding our economy depends on bringing and empowering those vulnerable folks. But the fact of the matter is that we can't ensure everyone is prepared to participate in our changing and dynamic workforce without also ensuring that everyone across the country has that affordable, reliable broadband connection, no matter their race, income level, or address. We need to help the people across America keep pace with this changing world. I'm very excited, and we'll hopefully talk about it more, about the $3.2 billion emergency broadband benefit program, which I believe will make broadband services more affordable for those struggling families that need it, especially during the pandemic. It's my hope that this program will be the start of our true efforts to ensuring that communities of color and low-income communities have meaningful connecting starting now. This moment in history has, of course, brought us an unparalleled opportunity to focus our efforts on the fundamental value of equity as we rebuild our workforce, rebuild those businesses, and restructure the economy. So I look forward to, of course, hearing from these leaders, thought leaders, and advocates as we work collaboratively to achieve that equitable future. So now I'm going to turn the program over to our moderator, Kim Tigner, who serves as the Executive Director of the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice throughout her career. Kim has focused on those hard-hitting legal issues surrounding underprivileged persons, advancing the causes of equality and social justice. She is particularly well-versed in working across multicultural issues, the topics of key interest to activists, creative entrepreneurs, and small business owners of color. Kim, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Commissioner, thank you so much for having me here. I'm actually pretty excited about this conversation. I feel like as far as advocates and thought leaders who have been thinking about the disparate impact that a national and global crisis would have on the Black community, on Black workers, on Black businesses, it is the all-star panel that you guys have put together for today. So thank you so much for allowing me to moderate this great discussion. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Ron Busby, President, CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers. As president of the Black Chambers, Ron brings business management skills as well as a lifetime of community development experience to the organization. Currently, Ron serves on the Pfizer Small Business Council, National Newspapers Publishers Association Foundation Board of Directors, and White House African American Leadership Council. He has also formerly served as the U.S. Small Business Administration's Council on Underserved Communities. Ron, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Stephanie Sykes, Founding Executive Director and General Counsel of the African American Mayors Association, where Stephanie oversees the daily operations, policy agenda, and legal affairs of the AAMA. Stephanie also serves as a Google Next Gen Tech Policy Leader, a member of the Verizon National Consumer Advisory Board, and is a member of the Bloomberg What Works City Standards Committee. Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us. And last, thanks, Stephanie. And last, I wanted to introduce Charles Phillips. Charles is the co-founder and co-chairman of the Black Economic Alliance. Charles is the managing partner and co-founder at Recognize, a technology investment and transformation company with over $1 billion in assets. He is the former CEO and chairman of Infor, the third largest business software application company in the world with operations in 190 countries and 17,000 employees. Charles, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And so you see, you guys, I was not exaggerating when I said that we are in for a great discussion because these are some great panelists. And so with that, I just want to do a level set and just open this up to everyone. And just off the top of your head, what are the top 3 qualities that Black-owned businesses or workers need to be in the innovation, to be competitive in the innovation era?
Well, I guess I'll go first to give a high-level perspective, and I know that I'm going to be joined by 2 expert panelists as well that will also have perspective. I think for us, again, we represent close to 360,000 Black-owned businesses throughout our reach of 148 Black chambers across the country. When we surveyed our businesses, there were really 4 things that primarily all of them had as reference to concerns of moving forward and really respect to the digital divide. The first one, if you ask any small business owner what their number 1 concern is, they will say access to capital. But when you talk to a Black business owner, they would say their number 1, number 2, and number 3 concern is access to affordable and available access to capital. And I think not only has that hit us extremely hard, as it's been stated, we lost 41% of our businesses during the 4th quarter of 2020. And many of them are really struggling to see if they can make it through 21 during the next 60 to 90 days. The second one, in which I hope we have a lot of opportunity to speak to today, is really about broadband. When we looked and talked to our members, only 32% of them were saying that broadband was friendly to them. They did not have the ability to use e-commerce to really be able to expand their businesses. 65% of all Black people live within, really 16 states, and we can really pinpoint where our customers as well as our businesses are being located. And many of our businesses were looking for new customers and did not have that ability to be able to reach outside of their communities of Black people to be able to provide additional revenue and resources to their communities. The third one was really technical support. Many of our businesses suffered during the last year because of the fact that they did not know where to go get the expert advice and training to be able to find where the resources and information was. And then lastly, I think most importantly, that is good policy. We need to be able to address the needs of our businesses throughout the country as it relates to technology and broadband, to be able to make sure that they have what they need going long term to be able to get through these difficult times.
Kim, and I would like to jump in and add that absolutely echo what Ron is saying on broadband and capital. And for the membership that I serve, the nearly 400 Black mayors in the country, and of our membership, about 25% of our members serve cities over 100,000 or more in population. The pipeline for talent is important. The reskilling of talent, once you have them, people need to be able to have opportunities and access to lifelong learning. And when Ron mentioned policy, I definitely agree with that. There needs to be a very friendly ecosystem to support Black businesses, both in regulation, but also in incentives to attract more businesses and in this moment, give them the lifelines they need to survive the pandemic.
Yeah, I'd just add in additional that certainly capital is critical. I've seen a lot of that. I was on the board of the U.S. Federal Reserve Board in New York, and I'm on the board of American Express now, serving a lot of small companies. And what I found is white businesses tend to have more sources of capital, not just a local bank, but business development companies, private equity, venture capital, microloans, CDFIs. There's all these different pockets of capital that specialize in small businesses. And we don't seem to be aware of them as much as other businesses. So just looking at that one, there's an education issue there as well. And secondly, I think these companies need to digitize their businesses more thoroughly. The obvious one is having a storefront and being discoverable online, but the way you run your business as well. Part of the reason so many businesses, that Black businesses did not have access to the PPP loans is they weren't automated sufficiently. They did not have the records. And now there are fintech companies that will automate your back office and connect you to all these lending sources so you can get same-day loans because they automatically can download your banking statements, your accounting statements, your financial position, and you can get approval in 2 hours. We're nowhere in that. So these companies that were already digitized got their money much faster. And so we need to rethink who needs to be online and that there are other reasons beyond the storefront for investing in technology as well.
And so building on this theme of looking at how the pandemic just really hit our Black businesses hard, I want to circle back to a statistic that Commissioner Starks mentioned earlier. The number of working Black business owners in the U.S. plummeted more than 40% as the pandemic shut down the economy, which is just startling. What are the factors that led to this? And how has access to affordable broadband and technology impacted Black businesses and their ability to stay afloat during the pandemic? Charles, do you want to, I'm going to go right back to you.
Sure. Well, I'm on the reopening commission for the governor here in New York, so I can speak specifically of what we've seen here. Black businesses tend to be more consumer oriented and more dependent on foot traffic. And we just, here in New York, we don't have that, right? Everything shut down, restaurants, barbershops, beauticians. And so it was an immediate impact. We tend to also be more involved in businesses that are more difficult to do online. So that's a longer term business mix, skills mix thing that we have to deal with over time. The second thing is the immediate reaction is usually, okay, let's give these small businesses some loans to so they can survive, and they don't want loans. They need grants. They already have loans. They can't afford more loans, and in some cases, if they got the loan, they wouldn't be able to pay it back. And so what we're proposing here in the city is to give them a wage subsidy. In other words, bring your employees back. We'll pay 50% of their wages for at least a year. At least you get the business back open. We'll share the cost with you. Short of something like that, it's very hard for these businesses to come back, white or black, by the way. Once they're completely shut down, they run out of capital, they've been paying rent, they're out of money. So a loan won't do you any good.
Ron, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with Charles there in reference to reopening, but I also want to pivot a little bit in reference to the payroll protection plan, because the program was really created to protect the employees of the business. In the Black community, we own and operate 2.6 million Black-owned businesses, but of that, 2.5 million have no employees. So when you create a program that addresses the employees of businesses, but you don't address the needs of the business owner, then you take out of play 95% of Black-owned firms. Of the 2.6 million, only roughly 115,000 have one employee. So the payroll protection plan was never created to protect Black-owned businesses. When we talk about the future, we have to be specifically meet the needs of the business versus the employees of the business. When the first stimulus package came out and there was $349 billion, and that's the first $250 billion went to those 50 white publicly traded firms, no one asked them about, where's your payroll? Did you lose revenue? Were you impacted negatively? But yet, when the second round came about, and even now that we're talking about this next round, it really is about how you were impacted. Those first 50 publicly traded firms did not have to meet those criteria. So the criteria that the business owners are now having to face is even more challenging. And as we push people to go to fintech firms, understand it really is about relationships. The reason why we didn't get funded early on is not because we were financially illiterate. It's not because we didn't have our documentation prepared. It's because we didn't have the relationships with the banking institutions that could tell us yes. And so now you want to place us in the hands of another institution that does not know us. I want us to go back to traditional banking. So now you want us to leave the Wells Fargos, the B of A's, the large banks, and go to a CDFIs, but most of us still bank with Wells Fargo, B of A's, and the large banks. And so I want to make sure that we hold both the CDFIs accountable, give them the technology, the resources that they need to ensure that our businesses maintain, but also make and hold the large banking institutions accountable to make sure that they fund us. We can't just move the ball every time there's a new game. This is a long-term issue for Black-owned businesses that needs to be addressed with a long-term strategy.
Right. Ron, I want to just, add what we're hearing on the ground from mayors, which is that the information is not meeting people where they are. When we're thinking about voter engagement and how effective we were to mobilize the Black community, that information of how to apply for a PPP loan should be at the barbershop. It should be at the churches. It should be everywhere we are, so that we can apply for it. And also on the sole proprietor point, the other piece are nonprofits. We have to look at institutions that employ people, whether it's churches, whether it's nonprofits, and give them the tools and the resources they need, because they employ people in local economies. And so when mayors were hearing, challenges in their cities, there wasn't information. It was online. So this goes back to where is the information? Is it accessible to the people that need it? Is it in the language? If they have different abilities, can they see that information online? And are they banked? The relationship doesn't have to be a high level at the golf course. It's our population is often unbanked. And so if you don't have a bank that you can put in your passcode to get the application, we have to start there of getting those, the financial literacy early. There's an education piece, but also giving the resources to local communities, local mayors, to make sure that information is trickling down to the people that need it most.
I couldn't agree with you more on the lack of information, because we interviewed something like 600 businesses by Zoom, and none of them knew exactly how the program worked, where to find information, we measured and something like 56% of them had the wrong documentation or no documentation. So there was a lack of information. They did not have relationships with these big banks. They had relationships with the CDFIs, but the CDFIs weren't even sure what to do because they weren't as automated either. No one told them. And so then the first round that came through, it was like a jump ball process where we got to the money, got their applications in first. And so on the Fed board, what we did was, basically appeal to the program and Small Business Administration to set money aside for the CDFIs to give them time to learn the program and for everybody to get their acts together. And secondly, they didn't know they could self-certify. You didn't have to have all that documentation, but no one told them that. So they're smarter about it now, but to your point, it needs to be more information available. And secondly, these large banks typically don't like a lot of small business customers because they're just as much work and they make less money. And so it's hard to force them to go to a bunch of small loans where they can do big loans where they make a lot more. So that's why CDFIs exist and small banks exist and BDCs exist who focus on these small businesses. So they are in the neighborhood. So let's capitalize them, educate them so they can help more businesses.
No, I love that. I love that. And I love this. Stephanie, I'm going to steal your line of meeting our Black businesses where they are, right? And that's where the policy needs to be. Commissioner Starks, I wanted to circle back on something that you mentioned earlier. Prior to and during the pandemic, you championed affordable broadband as solutions for closing the digital divide. This was especially through your calls to expand the Commission's Lifeline and E-rate programs. You mentioned the FCC's Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, and I wondered if you could give us a little more insight into how you believe this program can empower Black workers and Black owners, business owners.
Yes, well, I'm on this piece in particular. Folks have been talking about the digital divide, but really have had a framing of how do we get out to that last mile out in rural areas. But the fact of the matter is that nearly 3 times as many Americans, as I said, are in densely populated areas, remain disconnected. And so that adoption reason, that the piece that is missing here is that you have, especially now more than ever in the pandemic, 20+ million Americans who simply can't afford that connection that we know that they need. If folks are trying to decide between keeping the lights on or keeping their household lit up and connected, those are very real concerns. And so we need to drive an affordable option. And so reaching those low income folks, those communities of color that have been find themselves consistently on the wrong side of the digital divide. Late last year, Congress passed omnibus appropriations for about $3.2 billion for this emergency broadband benefit that we're working through right now. And so the goal is to get those low-income households, especially those with school-age children, connected with affordable rates. And so providers will be reimbursed. I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but providers will be reimbursed up to $50 per each month per low-income household. It goes up to $75 for tribal lands. And then also can be reimbursed up to $100 if you provide that household also with a connected device. We also know that a lot of folks, in particular those with students, need devices as well in order to effectuate the connectivity that we know that family needs. And so there are a lot of categories of folks that are going to be eligible. It's whether you currently are in Lifeline for a family in a household that's on free and reduced school lunch and breakfast, federal Pell Grant students, and it also includes those who have experienced unemployment and COVID-related loss of income. So that's a long way round of saying, if we are successful, and I'm pushing for us to be, this emergency broadband benefit will reach more disconnected, low-income people and households of color than any previous FCC effort. And so, I'm pushing for more providers, I'm pushing for more participants, but as you can tell, the whole thread here, connecting our Black and brown households, connecting our workers, it's going to be an essential ingredient to us rebuilding and rebuilding strong, including coming out with when the economy comes back around. And so I'm deeply heartened by what we're talking about here today, but there's work to do.
That's right. There's work to do. And with that, speaking of work to do, Stephanie, I'm coming back to you because I just really feel like, one thing that just blows my mind every time is that I feel like you all literally have your finger on the pulse of Black communities across the country, right? I feel like a lot of these issues that take a little while to reach the national dialogue, you all have already been on the forefront and on the ground, fighting and thinking about these things. So with that, what role do you think cities and localities play in narrowing the digital divide?
Thank you, Kim, for that. And local leaders, they don't have a crystal ball. Us that are advising them, we do not have a crystal ball. It's just a reflection of the fact that they are the closest to understanding what's going on. And they have such a high level of accountability. They can't wait till something is passed. There's no Democratic or Republican way to fill a pothole that people say. So local leaders have to get it done. And so I'm so proud of the work that the organization has done. And part of it is looking at all the challenges holistically to get people connected. So the access is partnerships. In Houston, they've used CARE Act's funding. Newark, Atlanta, there's community centers to make sure students have places to go. In Newport News, McKinley Price, who's our president, she's made sure that there's a Connect program in his public schools. And mayors are being creative. If it's using their Wi-Fi bus, everyone saw the heartbreaking photo of the students in a fast food parking lot. That's not what we want our students to have to do to have education. But as a mom of a child in virtual kindergarten, it is a very challenging time. And then for children who not only don't have broadband, they're facing eviction. They're facing the lights going off and the water going off. So they can't plug in their modem. So we have to have a holistic approach to thinking about broadband access. This week, I talked about that in an op-ed in the Morning Consult that, broadband is holistic because we have to have equitable environments to plug into. And so that's what local leaders understand. They understand the eviction crisis. They understand the crisis that the students are facing, and they also understand the businesses. And the last thing I'll add is also in this other picture is also a learning around digital literacy. We take for granted that everyone is literate. So for those, when we're talking about education and parents guiding their children in this digital world, 23% of Black adults are not digital literate. So mayors really look at all of these little individual slices that are barriers to a very plugged in, cohesive digital learning environment for our children and our businesses as well.
I'm going to go right back to you though, Stephanie, because I am curious. Are any of your members doing kind of stand out in your mind as far as addressing these issues? Because I am curious if there's maybe a playbook that we can maybe replicate in other communities.
Sure, absolutely. So the cities I just mentioned, Houston with Comcast and Atlanta, what it really is private-public partnerships. As the commissioner mentioned earlier, and Kim, as you mentioned, there's funding issues. Cities and states are cash strapped. So they're being creative and leaning on partners, through philanthropy. There's going to be a need for more CARES funding and flexible funding to meet these needs. And there's also a really important issue around funding when we talk about communities of color, and that is making sure that it goes directly to cities. The mayors have been very vocal about that. We were very fortunate to have a town hall with Vice President Harris last night, and the theme there was that whether it's broadband or any other element of recovery in this moment of the pandemic, the cities have to get the dollars, and the cities are the ones leveraging their partnerships, their headquarters of companies in their backyards. But those dollars need to go directly to our leaders of color who may be blue islands in red seas, which means that sometimes there's challenges there in getting the funding directly to the communities that need it most. We're nonpartisan, but we cannot help but notice the challenges that our cities face in the current political environment, with the differences between the states and local governance structures. And so, we're advocating, and mayors understand that if they get those dollars, they know where they need to be used, and particularly in a way that is equitable and giving more resources to the communities that have been underserved.
I want to open it up to Ron and Charles to see if you guys have any thoughts on what elected officials are doing to address the digital divide.
Well, I would like to kind of piggyback on something that Charles mentioned earlier, which I think is having a positive impact or negative, depending upon you look at it. He mentioned the fact that the firms that have internet visibility are doing well. And many of our Black businesses that are receiving grants and are receiving loans, the PPP, had the ability to have a good online presence. One of the things that we found is organizations like Comcast and the RISE program, it's not just about a small business owner getting $10,000 or $25,000, but they do need the technical support. As she stated, 35% of Black business owners aren't efficiently trained when it comes to making sure that they have the visibility. And so what we need to be able to provide from both private sector and public sector is the resources and the information that they need to be able to now provide that visibility through e-commerce to be able to grow and keep on to the business that they currently have. I think that there's got to be intentionality as we look forward. We no longer can afford to allow minority programs to be able to determine what happens in Black communities. When we create minority and diversity programs, it's usually white women that benefit. And in this sector, we're talking about losing 40% of Black-owned businesses. We've got to address that concern. And so we can do that intentionally by saying, as we talk about infrastructure bills, let's make sure that we're looking at the communities that were impacted first and foremost. I know Stephanie knows that there's 40 counties that were hit the hardest. Let's go there when we started to talk about infrastructure. Now we can start to say, well, let's make sure that we're including businesses from those communities to make sure that they get contract opportunities. And then we can hold those businesses accountable to hire from within their zip codes. So now you have a policy program that we have had involvement in to make sure that it's positively impacting our communities, both from the employee standpoint as well as the business owner.
I say there's a big debate here in New York going on about what to do about broadband. If you look at the state, certainly the rural areas are major areas that don't have access at all, or at least the way it's defined. Even in the city, though, there are pockets or large pockets of areas where either they lack broadband or they lack modern broadband, whether it's 100 megabytes speed or higher. And then, of course, it has to be affordable. And so the question is, what's the best way to go about that? There's a big commission, and they came out with it's going to cost us $1.8 billion. But should we do it the same way, or should the government own, the city own more of that conduit, build up the infrastructure itself, and then let the ISPs compete to lay the wire and lay service on top of that, which is what we do for other things, for electricity and water. The city owns that infrastructure. So why are we relying on private industry forever? And they decide where they want to put the high-speed fiber because they're going to go into the areas where they think they're going to get the highest return. And so unless something is done differently, even when you have broadband, it's going to be the slowest broadband for underserved communities. And you may not get it at all because you're waiting for someone else to do it. So could you create a more competitive environment for, if you want to be in the best areas, you got to be in these areas as well and own the infrastructure. So I do think that's worth a conversation. Some cities have tried that. There have been smaller cities for sure. But it's been successful in the fact that there's been 22 states that were sued to stop government-owned broadband by AT&T and Verizon, said it must be doing something right. So they're worried about it. So I do think it's worth exploring.
And so I'm going to take us to the final question. This is actually it's gone fast. And I'm sorry that this is the last question, but as devastating as COVID-19 has been, it offers us this chance to rebuild society and economy in a more equitable way. What does a more just and equitable economy look like to you? Commissioner Starks, I'm going to let you start us off, and then I'm going to open it up to the panel.
Well, as This has gone by fast as well. So I second you there, Kim. You know, the thought that crosses my mind, of course, is that, you know, it was one of my heroes, the late Congressman John Lewis, who said that access to broadband is a civil right. And I have amplified that point as a point of equity. And when you're talking about civil rights, of course, right, you're talking about something that truly, you know, why would we call connectivity and access to broadband a civil right in that manner? You know, it's like thinking about conceptually the right to vote, the civil right there. You know, when you're talking about voting, it's not just simply vote. It also is economic power. It is housing. It is, you know, it's enable, and it begets other things that are important in our civil society. And I think conceptually, the access to broadband is the same thing. We see that it is impacting healthcare. We see that it's impacting jobs. We see that it is hitting how our students are getting educated. And so when folks talk about the need for us to treat this like a civil right, we're talking about something that is a definition of how we are equitably going to distribute opportunity across our communities. And I think the time is now for us to make sure that all Americans are connected to that ubiquitous broadband that we know that they need.
And then, so Ron, I'm going to kick it to you first.
Great. Well, thank you for having us here. I think this panel and the experts on here can help America do a couple of things. One, provide data. In this last year, when we have been trying to tell the story, we were early saying we were going to lose between 35 and 40% of Black-owned business. And no one heard. No one took us seriously. And then when the Federal Reserve said, yes, guess what? You lost 41% of Black-owned businesses. Then people were like, oh my God, how did that happen? We've got to make sure that we're sharing the data from across the country. When our technology partners survey us, they never ask the question about nationality or race. They ask the question about minority. They ask the question about demographics. But for our community, we need to have specific data so that we can tell specific stories and create specific solutions for our specific needs. And so I'm hopeful that as we continue to partner together, we can continue to share our information. And then lastly, our tagline, in order for there to be a great America, we've heard a lot about it over these last 4.5, 5 years. We say there must be a great Black America. And in order for there to be a great Black America, there must be great Black businesses. In order for there to be great Black businesses, we need great Black chambers, and we need great broadband for all of us to be able to make sure that we can participate in this economy. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Kim, for this wonderful discussion. But I will just leave this with, for me, equity looks like anyone who wants to start a business has the opportunity and understanding of where they can locate resources to not only start that business, to grow that business, and to scale that business into a business of impact that will provide jobs and opportunities for their community. As a founder, a small organization that's now growing to national significance, it is difficult on the administrative side. So we have to look at that very closely to make sure there's a friendly regulatory environment, that there's training, that there's reskilling opportunities, and that our local leaders have the resources and, more importantly, the funding to support Black businesses and their workers. Thanks.
Yeah, I just say to add to that, we talked about access to broadband. I think we need access to intellectual capital as well. When people start businesses, a lot of time it depends on how big that business is going to be. What is the business? What's the skill set? What's the differentiation? So a lot of people who start businesses, they were working at something before, derived some skill set, saw a way to do it better, and then built a business around it. So I'd like to see us build different types of businesses beyond, the retail businesses that we're, typically concentrated in. So one of the initiatives that I'm working on with Ken Frazier, who's CEO of Merck, and Ken Chenault, former CEO of American Express, is we challenged the Business Council, who represents about 250 CEOs, can they hire 1 million Black people over the next 10 years into Fortune 500 companies and give them these skill sets. And they may stay, they may not, but they'll have a skill set they can go start their own business with and go deeper. And they've committed to doing that. So we got about 40 companies on board. They committed 100 million a year. The organization called 110. It's all one word, 110. And we just kicked off a couple board meetings this past month or so. So if we can get that many people trained by workforce development programs, which are scattered all over the country, they can't find Black people where to hire them. It's too much work, it's too much friction. So this organization will connect them to the programs that work. You just commit to hiring people, we'll get them trained for you. So that's what we're going to try to do. And through that, hopefully we create, people with skill sets who create better companies and intergenerational wealth. But we got to get out of these low wage jobs and get automated away anyway and move into some more high order skill sets. That's what this is designed to do.
That's great. And I just want to thank you guys. I've learned a lot today, and I feel like, the folks who are in attendance have as well. If we could just quickly, if you all could share the best way for us to continue to engage and follow your organizations, I think that would be great. Charles,
I'm the easiest guy in the world to reach, charles@charles.com. You can always find me.
Ron Busby, you can find us at US Black Chambers, BLACKCHAMBERS.org. If you're a Black-owned business looking to be found, looking to have other Black people support you, or looking for grants, onboard your company at byblack.us, byblack.us. To find out more opportunities from the U.S. Black Chambers.
Thanks. And to learn about the African American Mayors Association, please go to ourmayors.org, also on Twitter and Instagram at ourmayors.
And I'll close us out here. Thank you, of course, to Stephanie, Ron, Charles Phillips, and our tremendous moderator, Kim. When I started thinking about these as a commissioner, I'm obviously able to be reached, easily reached as well, at Jeffrey Starks on Twitter, but more importantly, available as an FCC commissioner. I started originally thinking about this as the future of work. And then obviously now during the pandemic, it has reverberated in a lot of different ways. But we have a shared collective future here, and the need for us to make sure that the pillars of our communities, our Black communities, are focused and intentioned, I think is great. And so deeply appreciate all the work that everyone on the panel is doing, those that are joining us as well. And I'll close out by saying I'm going to host another event next week. That is going to be on Thursday, February 18th. That is the second of what turns out to be a series focusing on HBCUs, another pillar of our Black communities. This roundtable is going to feature Dr. Frederick, the president of Howard University, Dr. Glenda Glover of Tennessee State University, the president there, President David Thomas of Morehouse, and then the president of Delaware State University, Dr. Tony Allen. And we are going to have a tremendous conversation that's also going to be moderated by Dr. Dominique Harrison from the Joint Center. But that is another point that we need to focus on as well, and make sure that our communities continue to thrive through this pandemic. So much of what we're talking about is making sure that we continue that Black excellence as well. So deeply appreciate the time by everybody. Thank you for joining us. And as Kim said, let's keep the dialogue going, and looking forward to it. Everyone be safe, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.